Hi Jess, the stream is now live.
Lovely, thank you, Jack. Good afternoon and welcome to this meeting of the Corporate Governance Group. Before we commence with the proceedings, I can confirm that the Council has adopted some basic etiquette rules for its remote meetings. For ease, these are as follows. Only speak when the Chairman invites you to do so. Members, please let the Chairman know when you want to speak through the chat function. The Chairman will introduce speakers in the order that the request to speak was made, unless there is a point of order which will be prioritised. Please minimise all distractions while you are in the meeting. Members are asked to mute your microphones when not speaking and consider turning your video off too to reduce interference on the audio feed. Please bear in mind that there may be a lag between speaking and other attendees hearing you. Presentations, images or video footage should have been made available to you in advance of the meeting and will be visible on the screen. Please indicate via the chat function if there is a problem. When referring to a report, please quote the page and paragraph number. There is no private business for this afternoon. However, members are reminded that it is their responsibility to make sure that their venue and connection is private. If you lose connection at any point and are unable to immediately rejoin, then please call the meeting facilitator. Contact details have been provided. Please only use the chat function for the purpose prescribed for requesting to speak or for a point of order. The chat function is subject to the Access to Information Regimes, FOI-EIR, and is also subject to data protection, rules of defamation, and the Council's Code of Conduct. For this meeting, councillors are identified by a prefix of councillor before their name. There are officers in attendance. They are identified with the prefix of officer. There is a minute taker for this meeting and 2 meeting facilitators. I can confirm that the meeting is quorate. The Corporate Governance Group consists of the following members: Councillors Eusden, Hume, Johnson, Mann, Miss Santomoro, Van Dolken, Wallace, Walsh and Mrs Walters. The officers for this meeting: Governance and Members Manager, Jessica Mann, Governance and Members Officer, and Chloe Waite, Governance Business. My name is Jessica Mann and I will be the meeting facilitator and the clerk for this meeting. I will now hand over to the Chairman, Councillor Richard Van Dolken. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jessica, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Corporate Governance Group. My name is Councillor Richard Van Dolken, and I'll be chairing this meeting. I'm being assisted by a governance officer and 2 meeting facilitators who will help me identify when people wish to speak and manage the notification through the chat function. I can't necessarily see you all, so please let me know using the chat function if there are any issues with your internet connection. Please also remember to mute your microphone when you finish speaking. Members, for this meeting, when I seek your agreement, silence will be taken as assent. As the meeting facilitator has confirmed the attendance of members and officers for this meeting, I shall now proceed with the business of today's meeting. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies?
Chairman, we have apologies from Councillor Lynn Walters and Councillor Vanessa Santomoro, and we also have apologies from Kim Cole, the Head of Governance and Monitoring Officer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll proceed to item 2, declarations of interest. Do members have any disclosable pecuniary or non-pecuniary matters to declare this evening, or sorry, this afternoon? Please state the item and the nature of your interest through the chat function. I take it that there are no declarations, so we'll proceed to item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. Members, there are no minutes to be approved at this meeting. Our previous one was last week, Wednesday, the 20th of January. The minutes for that meeting are being prepared and will be considered at our next meeting on the 24th of February. We now proceed to item 4, public question time. There are no registered speakers, so I think, yes. We'll go on to item 5, Constitution Review, Chapter 2, Part 1. Members, this report is set out in pages 5 to 49 of the agenda, and in the absence of Kim Cole, Head of Governance, can I ask Emma Wisby, Governance and Members Manager to speak on the report.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, I will do my very best to present Kim's report and presentation. I'm grateful for any assistance by Councillor Mann and Councillor Richard Van Dolken, who are members of DGG, who've already seen this presentation and have already considered the papers. What I will do, members, I've got the presentation which I will share screen with you, and then I will take you through the presentation, and then if members wish me to pause at any time, then please just indicate. If there is not a question I can answer, if I may, I'll make a note of that question and take that away and give a written response to the committee, so we can try and get some answers to you as soon as possible. So I'm just going to share my screen with the presentation. So members, could you just confirm you can see the presentation with the starting page, the Constitution View, Chapter 2?
Yes.
Thank you, members.
Yes.
Members, that's lovely, thank you. Members, this is the first time I've done this with a presentation to the side, so if I do look off screen, I do apologise. So I'm working with 2 screens. So members, so the first slide is to just outline the timetable of the Constitution Review. As you can see, we've got meetings of DGG, the Developing Democracy Group, and CCG, this committee, with their respective meeting dates. As you can see, we're halfway through this governance and constitution review, and we're still on target to present a new constitution to full council on the 29th of March. However, members, I just need to caveat that we are looking to change some dates around DGG and this committee to be undertaken a very brief review of where we are, and we just need to take a little bit more time to make sure that we've got papers complete for you. So there'll be separate communication with members of DGG and CCG about changing the date of meeting, but we are still on target to ensure we complete the Constitution Review for full council on the 29th of March. This slide is just to remind you the aims of the review. This is the same document that you saw in our first meeting when we looked at the commencement of this review into the Constitution. We haven't added anything there, but it's there for ease of reference. Now, today, members, you're looking at Chapter 2 of the Constitution, and this is a continuation of the review that you've previously started. We're looking at 4 specific elements today. These are the council procedurals, the cabinet procedurals, the access to information procedurals, and officer employment rules. There are other aspects which will come forward, so the subjects that we're looking at today are in bold on the screen before you. Now, first thing we're going to look at is the council procedurals. So everything in green on this slide are matters that we've made amendments to. The petition scheme is in a red arrow because we've actually taken this out of the Constitution. It's going to be a standalone policy document which we will look upon later on in this meeting. But the things that will have been examined as part of this review are the types of council meetings, written responses to deadlines, the order of the agenda, new confidential appendix reports, leader statements, chairman's rulings, and suspension of time limits. So I'm just going to start to take you through those. So at the moment, members, the main principle of the Constitution route is to standardise processes in terms of languages, deadlines and formats, and we're trying to have a consistent approach through the entire document so it's easy for the reader to understand our principal document, the organisation. So we've looked at the types of meetings and how they've been expressed within the Constitution historically, and this way round we are looking at expressing the 3 types of council meetings. So that's the ordinary meeting of full council, the AGM, the annual general meeting, and the extraordinary meetings of full council. These are going to be set out separately within the Constitution, and it will express what business can be undertaken within those meetings. With regards to ordinary business at meetings, one of the provisions that we are bringing forward is how we deal with urgent items. Urgent items arise where they can't be dealt with either at a previous meeting or a matter has been escalated through our governance arrangements for there to be a urgent decision. Now, currently, urgent items appear at the end of an agenda, and the intention of this amendment is to bring urgent items to the beginning of the agenda. This will enable there to be proper consideration of the urgent item at the right time. So common sense says if it's urgent, it should be considered right at the beginning of the meeting. So it's the intention that the Constitution does allow for that. We've made reference to the removal of the chairman's ruling. That has been picked up in the council procedurals as a whole. Also, in terms of time limits for the duration of the meeting, at the moment we have provision which leaves some ambiguity as to how we can use it. We can either extend the time until we dealt with an item of business has been concluded, or for a period of time. So we're looking to have a provision that will to extend the meeting for a specific period of time rather than leave it open-ended. As part of the governance review, we've also looked at introducing a report template, which we'll look at later on in the evening. Sorry, this afternoon. Sorry, members, I'm still in the mindset of having evening meetings rather than afternoon meetings. So the new report template will provide for a confidential appendix rather than having the approach that we currently have, where we have two reports, one public and one private. And also, when we list the papers on the agenda, any confidential appendix would be referencing the papers that would be available to members. So just moving on to the deadlines. Within the Constitution for council meetings, we have a number of deadlines, and we're looking for a consistent approach where we can achieve those. So at the moment, we have a public question time deadline and a motions amendment deadline. And a lot of these deadlines are in place, which gives us sufficient time to manage the workload that flows from somebody either registering to speak at public question time, or when we have a submission of a motion, or when we have an amendment to a motion. And we need to make sure that we do have sufficient time to manage the work that that commences from those triggering activities. So what I'm going to do is just move on to the next slide, which shows our current timescales for deadlines which are triggered for meetings. Now, these have been looked at by DGG. And we've already incorporated some changes that have been suggested by DGG. So you're looking at a slightly different document to which DGG looked at. But as you know, we like to do this as a live matter. So set out on the as you look at the left of the screen, these are all our current deadlines for full council. And on the right is the proposed lead-in times for full council. These were looked at in quite some depth by DGG. We had quite a lot of conversation about the impacts of deadlines, not just on members, but also officers, to make sure that we can get papers out to you in good time. And also, when we mean good time, we mean meaningful time, because obviously you have an awful lot of papers to read and prepare for. So from our current deadlines, there have been some changes which we do not feel would have a detriment impact upon any members of public ability to submit a question, or the ability for a amendment to bring an amendment to a motion. So as you can see, We can use Monday to Friday as our normal publishing, because that reflects what we do for full council. So currently on a Monday, we have at 5:30, we have notices of motions for deadlines and deadlines for council statements and chairman's statements. So the proposal going forward is for that to remain the same, for that to be at 5:30. Obviously, when we get the motions in, we like to circulate that as soon as possible, and we're looking to be consistent with our current arrangements to circulate that on the first working day after the deadline. We publish the agenda on a Friday. That's the presumption that the meeting is going to be held on a Monday. So for other meetings, this would be different, but this just sets out the principles. We do a draft order paper currently for the chairman of full council, and that is normally prepared 2 working days after we publish the agenda. Now, this is where our changes do change. So at the moment, we have a deadline for amendments to motions, which is normally on the Monday, which is on the morning of the meeting, which, depending upon the wording of the motion, can actually mean quite some significant work for officers, because depending on what the motion is and depending on what the amendment is, we may need to take legal advice, we may need to take advice from our accountants to see whether that motion causes us any issues. So what we're doing is proposing that deadline is moved from Monday, the morning of the meeting, to the Wednesday before the meeting, to make sure that there is sufficient time to examine those amendments and the potential consequences. Now, at the moment, the public question deadline is on 12 noon of the Friday before the meeting. We're proposing that is the Thursday. That still leaves members of the public good time to register their expressions of interest. In practice, we have people who know our timetables and will start registering much earlier than the publication of the agenda. But what we are asking for is that when they submit their registration for public question time, we know what their questions are. So this would enable us to actually circulate those questions to the relevant members, so that there's time to consider the question being posed and the potential responses, so we can give a response at that meeting where appropriate. It also enables us to take any advice on any issues that may come up as a result of that question being asked. And where we would have the order paper prepared for the chairman on the Monday, the day of the meeting, we're looking to prepare that on the Friday before the meeting, and that will give the chairman more time to digest the order of the agenda and any sort of procedural matters that they must take care of during that meeting, to ensure that we've got a good, fair running of the meeting and that everybody is happy with that process. So that's a quick outline between the changes on the deadlines that we're looking at. Chairman, do you want us just to pause at this time to see if members want to ask any questions on the meeting deadlines?
That's fine, Emma. Yes, members, are there any points you'd like to make or any questions about this? This suggestion, as said, was, as Emma said, was came out of the discussion at the DGG meeting. Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's possibly worthwhile pointing out that all group leaders were present at that meeting, and all the changes are a distillation of their combined wisdom, and I don't think there's any point on our agenda today that was in any way contentious or sort of subject to disagreement within group leaders. So hopefully that gives members a little reassurance.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. That's an excellent point, and we can, I hope, take that into account when we're looking at the rest of it. I had a small point, Emma, and this is actually not. I don't know if it's actually mentioned in the agenda, but when we were talking about, or there was talk of pushing back the close of business, I would have thought it was pushing it forward, but no, I suppose it is. You're right. Okay, pushing back. Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll rewind. Forget that.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Members, I can't see the chat function, so I presume that there's no further questions on this part of the presentation. So I will move on to the next part, if I may. So the next part that we've examined is the public question time. Members, you're aware that this is a part of the Constitution that was reviewed not so long ago, but we are looking to bring in further changes to enable public engagement through the public question time procedures. So at the moment with the virtual meetings, as you know, if a member of the public doesn't want to read their statement, we will arrange for an officer to read that on their behalf during the meeting. So what we are sort of looking at is a provision that the member must be present, but also to allow the chairman to have discretion to allow the statement to be read out by an officer in their absence. So we're still requiring for the member public to be there, but that they can have their question read out by a member or an officer. We'd anticipate that being an officer of the governance service rather than an officer who's connected to the subject matter. We are also looking at moving the deadline for registration, which you've seen on the previous slide, and that again is so that we can look at the questions as submitted and then look at preparing responses by the relevant cabinet member or chairman to respond to the public during the meeting. And where obviously we can't do that, we will then look to do written responses. Okay.
Emma, we have a question from Councillor Walsh, perhaps, to this.
Yes, certainly.
Councillor Walsh.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Can you hear me, Emma?
Yes, I can.
I note the provision for a question by a member of the public, and it would only be answered by the 3 designated people, not by another member, and I fully understand that. Is it possible that the member of the public could ask a single supplementary, just in case the question may not have been fully understood or fully covered?
That would require a new provision to be introduced into the procedurals. We normally only allow a question to be asked. One, because we're on notice of the questions and that helps us to be able to respond to it. If there's any concerns around the intention of the question, we do have time within our processes to be able to clarify that if it's not clear. So that's why we're looking to push back the deadlines for public question time, so we do have that time. So we hope never to be in that position where there is a supplementary question, but we're not looking to introduce supplementary questions, because then you have a risk from being a public question time session to a public debating session, and that's obviously not what the purpose of full council or committee meetings are for. If somebody is obviously involved with an application or a business item, then they then have a voice through the various procedures, but it's not intended to give public question time a second opportunity at this stage.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So yes, as Councillor Walsh has pointed out, the respondents to the public question time sessions are the leader, cabinet and relevant chairman, and that's all set out in the report. So, so members, if I may, I will move on to the next slide, which deals with sorry, I apologise, members. I'm going to go back one. I don't think I'm doing Kim's presentations much disservice here. So just to remind members that that when we are sort of, sorry, I do apologise, members. Just want to draw your attention to paragraphs 2.4 of the report, where we talk about provisions within the council agenda that allows for statements to be read out by the leader to update the council on current issues which cannot be covered else in the agenda. We are clarifying that and providing for provision within the constitution, and where there's a council meeting and there are written responses to questions, the constitution doesn't currently provide a timescale for doing that. There's no official timescales. We do have a timescale outside a committee meeting where within 10 working days of a written question, we will provide a response, and we're looking to introduce the same measures. So however a question is posed to the authority, there'll be the same deadline of 10 working days for the authority to respond to that. Just wanted to draw that to members' attention. Okay. So the other aspect on is now on to motions, if I may. So there has been some amendments to the provisions on motions. The newest amendment is for where the proposer or seconder can't be in attendance at full council for a legitimate reason. There is proposed that there's going to be a provision for the proposer and seconder to have a nominee to present their presentation of a motion to full council. It was considered it wasn't fair that due to unforeseen circumstances that a motion may fall simply because the mover and the seconder couldn't be present. So we're looking to open up a provision that would allow a nominee to be able to present at the presentation of the motion in their absence. So it would be incumbent upon the proposer and the seconder to properly advise their nominee of the motion and be able to speak to it to full effect. Obviously, it wouldn't be an opportunity for the nominee to start giving their intention of what the motion may or may not be, because they are not the proposer, they are simply the speaker. So that is probably a useful tool, which we hope not to be seen used on a frequent basis, because obviously we've got very good member attendance, but it does give that provision should members not be available. The second change to motions is that where there is a motion which refers to a function of the Cabinet, then that motion would be referred to the Cabinet to consider. Now, this is to actually provide clarity around the executive and non-executive functions. Not to presume, but just remind members that the decisions which are deemed to be executive functions are defined by a set of regulations, and they are decisions only which the Cabinet can take, and there are matters which relate to functions of full council which only full council can take. So we're looking to provide a mechanism where the correct decision maker is considering those motions. So that is probably to members at the new introduction of what would seem to be a second motion structure, but all we are doing is making sure that the correct decision maker is taking that motion forward. Now, another provision is that we're looking at is the number of members required for a motion which would look at reviewing a decision that's been taken in the last 6 months. Currently within the Constitution, that figure is set at 20. That 20, we believe, reflected the membership of the council one administration ago, following the boundary review, where we went from 60 members down to 49. So what we are suggesting is that that threshold of members is reduced down to 16, because then that represents a third of the current membership of this authority. The other main thing around motions as well is looking at the number of motions that are able to be submitted during a meeting of full council. Now, currently the council procedure rules allow for 4 motions to be submitted by any one political group. This would mean that we could have potentially 16 motions at a meeting of full council. Now, this has not been utilised. We're grateful for that, but it is a provision that is available to members if they wish to do that. Now, DGG had quite an in-depth conversation around the provision of motions and what we could do going forward to be fair to all members having regards to motions. And DGG recommended an approach that motions be calculated on the Widdicombe rules, so it's the political proportionality rules, but starting that there'll be a figure of 6, no more than 6 motions on an agenda, and that would be apportioned on a 3-to-1 basis. So that would be 3 to the current administration, the Conservatives, 2 to the Green Independent group, and then with Labour and the House of Residents Association sharing 1 motion. There was quite an in-depth conversation about whether they considered this to be a fair approach. There was also further discussions about how members could actually collaborate cross-party as to make use of the figures. Certainly, Councillor Mann, in his capacity as the leader of the Labour group, spoke on the ability and the practice of doing cross group working on certain style of motions. So DGG recommended 6. Members remember as well, 6 would still lead to at least 3 hours worth of debate, because we do allow at least half an hour for each motion. So it would mean that there is a level which would allow a meaningful amount of motions to come forward. It would still allow for cross-party to work together to use part of the allocation, and obviously members working in good spirit with each other and talking to their group leaders around the use of those motions going forward. The other area of motions was also looking at the use of motions to amend reports. This is an area that was considered under a large conversation by DGG. So at the moment, members can essentially amend a recommendation within the report by way of a motion, and it was felt that that wasn't necessarily appropriate, because the report should have a degree of integrity, and if members did not agree with the recommendation, then the appropriate route is either to vote that recommendation down. So DGG did look at whether it'd be right to restrict the use of motions on reports, and it was considered that the use of motions would be excluded from amending reports, with the exception of the budget reports, and there would be a separate set of rules around how you could propose amendments to the budget. It was acknowledged that the budget report, the way it's prepared, there would be concerns around the transparency around our decision making and the ability for members to influence the budget if they weren't able to present motions on the budget. So the budget would be excluded from the provision that would prevent motions on officers' reports. So members, I'm just going to stop there. Chairman, do any members have any questions on the motions element?
I can't see any unless...
I've got Councillor Mann who's indicated. I can see.
Right. Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to validate what Emma has said, there was quite a long discussion on the number of motions. It was subject to a bidding war, and we ended up with 6 that seemed to satisfy all parties. But Emma has mentioned the budget, which I was going to remind us that was an exception because it's the one full council meeting of the year that does tend to attract a larger number of motions. Therefore, it will be subject to a different set of rules and not limited necessarily to 6. The DGG meeting is not anticipating that there will be 6 motions at every meeting. We've averaged 1 or 2, I think, over the last half a dozen full councils, but 6 is there as a capacity, and not as a guide for usual practice. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I echo that. Again, as we've said, I was at that meeting as well, and 6 motions, half an hour, 3 hours. If those, I think you'll all remember our last council meeting when we didn't even get a chance to talk about the reports from the scrutiny committees. So we have to put a limitation on that part of the meetings. Councillor Walsh, I think you had a question.
Yes, that's right, Chairman. Thank you. It's a suggestion, if I may. It goes back to paragraph 214 about the leader's statement. Now, obviously, the leader's statement is not shared in advance. I was just wondering if after the leader has given his statement, if it could be shared with all members. These are important statements, and it would assist with understanding, clarity and transparency. And I believe that's normal procedure, for example, at Essex County Council.
The only thing I'd say, Councillor Walsh, is that the leader doesn't actually prepare a written statement for publication. I've been here for 20 years and I was at County Council for 5 years previous to that. So I'm not aware of the practice that you've referred to. The leader quite often will speak from his feet on a variety of subjects. If that is something that we would have to discuss separately with the leader as to whether he would be prepared to commit to the production of a written statement, but currently the leader speaks on his feet in relation to the key points, but I'll note it down as a
I wasn't actually thinking for publication, just for distribution to members afterwards.
Well, the only thing we would say, obviously, Councillor Walsh, is that we still have at this current time, while we're in these virtual meetings, we have the YouTube channel, which obviously has the permanent recording of our meetings, and we also have our webcast. So if there is interest in going back to the leader's statement or any other member's statement, come to that, then we do have that recording there. We don't. There's very few circumstances where we have verbatim records of statements made by members, but certainly I'll make a note of that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, I think isn't it the case? Well, it is the case that at the council meetings, which I think is what Councillor Walsh is referring to, there is a printed what is the word, report from all the cabinet members, including the leader. So,
yes, there's 2 separate elements there, Councillor Van Delcombe. We have the leader's statement where he will speak to the whole organisation on particular points in part of the agenda, and then we have the cabinet members' reports, which the leader has an element within. There's always the potential that the leader's statement will cross-reference to something that is within that report, but usually the leader's statement is preserved for other matters not within that report. But certainly I'll take back Councillor Walsh's observations on that, and it's something that I'll speak to Kim with in due course. Sorry, members, the only thing I've been remiss to sort of touch upon is the deadlines for submission of motions. It doesn't really affect, well, apologies, members, it does affect you. we're trying to give some clarity around the deadlines on when submissions of motions are, because the current wording of the Constitution is not very helpful. It's an amalgamation of a number of rules that have taken place over the years. So we're looking to give some clarity so anybody reading the Constitution can work out when the deadlines are. So at the moment we unhelpfully have not 5:30 on the 9th clear working days, but actually what we're required to give is 9 clear working days between the submission of the motion and the meeting. So it's proposed that we're going to give a clearer timescale within the Constitution for the submission of motions of 9 clear working days, and a working day will be defined as 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. So really the deadline will be on the 10th working day before the meeting by 5 o'clock, or any requests for motions need to be received by the governance service going forward. So that's a point I just left out, and I do apologise. So if members have got any queries on that, I'm quite happy to take any questions on that element.
I don't think we have any questions.
Lovely, thank you very much.
Move on.
Okay, so the next part we're looking at is member substitutes. So this is a new concept for the District Council to consider. These are used in other authorities, and not just the County Council, but some of our neighbouring district authorities also have substitutes. So what we're exploring is whether there is a desire to have substitute members for certain committees. Now, DGG considered this in quite some length regarding what committees would have substitutes and any sort of restrictions on the new substitutes, and then how they come into play. So it's proposed that all committees would have a substitute for each of the political groups, with the exception of planning and licensing, and there would be a provision of up to 3 members on planning and licensing. The other point with planning and licensing, any substitutes would have to have training, because there are certain functions which fall to those 2 committees where it is a legal requirement to have training before those members can discharge any functions of the committees. If we do go ahead with substitutes, the substitute members would be on the agenda front sheet. So as members, you're aware, on our committee papers, you have the current membership of the committee, and it's proposed there'd be a second table underneath which would list these substitutes. Now, what we are exploring is how they would be used and when they can be brought into play. Now, at the moment in the report, and this is something that we've picked up from other authorities, that there's a time limit in which the notice of substitute can come into play, and some authorities set that as 1 hour before the meeting. Now, we as officers have got some thoughts around that 1 hour is a little bit too short a time period for the member to be notified that they're going to be a substitute for a member who can't make the committee, because obviously they need to be able to read the papers. They have to come in as a seamless member of that committee, so they will need a degree of knowledge and also be able to take an active part in the debate on the subjects on those agendas. So the thing that we would like to explore with you today is how long do you feel the notice period is or should be for engaging a substitute? So at the moment, as I said, the report refers to 1 hour. So in that hour, a member has to be contacted, read papers, get themselves ready to attend the meeting, and then join the meeting. It's not actually a huge amount of time, as you probably know from your own preparations in attending this meeting this afternoon. An hour goes very, very quickly. If notice cannot be given within that timescale, then the use of a substitute wouldn't be permitted, and that member would just go down as absent. So, for example, so if I just use Councillor Van Dolken, if Councillor Mann was a substitute for a meeting and Councillor Van Dolken couldn't attend, Councillor Van Dolken has 2 options: one, to give his apologies, or to give his apologies and ask for a substitute to attend in his absence. So in the 1 hour before the meeting, Councillor Van Dolken would have to find out who his substitutes are, make contact, see if they're available, ensure that they've got the papers, that the substitute has read the papers, and that the member then can come into the meeting. So an hour is quite a very short period of time. So we would like to sort of get your thoughts on what is the notification period that should be used for using substitutes. So Chairman, if I can just pause there and ask for members' feedback on those provisions, please.
Yes, of course. We have a question from Councillor Wallace, I believe.
Thank you, Chairman. Emma, could I just ask a question? With the substitutes, is there any time in your experience as an officer that you can recall a committee meeting being cancelled or delayed because of significant member absence, for example?
I would say in the last 5 years, I've only known one committee meeting to be cancelled due to it being in quorate, and that was in the winter where we had significant flu in the district. We had a number of members who were unwell, and in fact, we actually had we had issues with officers. So it's very rare for this authority to have a meeting in quorate. As you members know, my team spend a lot of time communicating with members. We monitor your apologies the whole time. We have a central list that so we know when members contact one of my team, we've got a central list and we keep an eye on that so we can then do the ring round and then speak to the chairman. So I'd say in 5 years, I'd say one meeting that we've cancelled due to be in quorate, and that was taken, I think, approximately about maybe an hour and a half before the meeting. So it's a very rare situation in which we find ourselves. I don't know how we compare to other authorities. I think we all manage our authorities and our committee memberships in very similar ways, but to my knowledge, it's not an area which is used, that we're at risk of, because members are very proactive with giving their apologies, and we speak to their chairmen as soon as we know there is an issue.
All right, Councillor Wallace?
Yes, thank you.
So I got one new message now. Councillor Eusden.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think an hour is definitely not enough. I would look at it purely on the basis that, one assumes we're going to get back to physical meetings at some point. And if you've only got an hour's notice, it may not be possible for a member to get to Causeway House in an hour, depending on the time of day. So I don't think an hour is sufficient. If it's planning, the planning agendas tend to be large, and I think it's unreasonable to expect somebody to read and prepare for a planning meeting within an hour. I would suggest that they would need at least a day's notice, on the assumption that they've had the meeting document sent to them on a just-in-case basis. So each substitute would have the documentation just in case they're needed. So then they've got a chance to read it, the same as any committee member, but they've got a day to refresh and make arrangements to be at the meeting. So my suggestion would be you need at least a day to notify a substitute. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eusden. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. I think we're looking at two separate issues here. One, with these virtual meetings, an hour is probably not too bad, but for those of us that live a fair way out from the council, if and when we're back to the normal meetings, we would need, at least half an hour to get there physically, etc., etc., and we'd need considerably more time. So are we considering that if we decide on the time factor today, that will transmit forward to us meeting together in the chamber? Now, there's two separate things altogether. For example, you've had a problem with Kim not attending today, so that wasn't expected. So she's had to get a very able substitute in Emma. And it is, time. I think that's the thing, but difficult to put a specific time factor on it, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. My feeling is certainly an hour is impossible. Some of these agendas, they're 60, 70 pages long, and those are the simple ones. So my feeling would be at least 24 hours. The reality, and perhaps Councillor Mann would agree with me, that when we were talking about this those couple of weeks ago, one of the obvious issues that came up is that the smaller parties don't really have sufficient people to necessarily substitute for every meeting. So in a sense, it's not necessarily always going to happen anyway.
Yes, I'd agree with that, Chair. In fact, the other group leaders had a little fun at my expense about how I was rather stuck for choice of substitutes, the group of two.
I hope you weren't suggesting that I was.
Certainly not. No, I took it all in good humour. But I agree that an hour is not sensible. And I'm surprised that we didn't make sort of more of that at DDG. But I wonder if Emma has got any information about the practice of other councils, what sort of time period they consider is adequate. I would also suggest that perhaps we're making rather a great deal of this substitute matter, because our attendance is very good, and I would think compares very favourably with some neighbouring authorities, and that really you only need to be terribly concerned about substitutes if the quorum is in danger and you have to abort a meeting. And as Emma says, that is very, very rare in this authority. And it is useful perhaps to have substitutes for the sort of quasi-judicial committees, regulatory committees, planning and licensing. But I can't believe that the mechanism will be widely used elsewhere, Chairman.
I think I agree. I was going to follow up and say that, well, you suggested quite rightly that perhaps the main issue is whether a meeting would be quorate. There is, of course, the political side of it in some instances. I suppose you could argue that a meeting like this is not really that political, but perhaps all parties would like to be part of it. So I think that there are two elements to it. But do I have a sense that, we don't want to dwell on this too long, do I have a sense that 24 hours would be an appropriate suggestion, members? Does anybody violently disagree with that or wish to make another suggestion? I think we'll go with that, Emma.
Thank you. That's very helpful to have members' views on that, particularly from a member side. I mean, as officers, we can make presumptions as to what your preparations are, and as Councillor Johnson has referred, at the moment we're in a virtual platform. When we're back into the physical world, the rules of the Constitution need to be future-proofed, so that would allow for that flexibility. So certainly, I will make a note that you think on 24 hours notice and use of substitutes. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, members. Okay, so next, members, I'm going to move on to the Cabinet procedurals. So what we've been looking at the moment is the council procedurals and how they will the amendments that we're looking to make to those. And there will be a provision within the council procedurals that will set out when those rules apply to the committees, working groups and subgroups of committees going forward as well. So what we're looking at now is specifically the council procedurals. Now, what we're really focusing on this part of the review is identifying any gaps that are outside the council procedurals and what is currently absent from the cabinet procedurals. So we are bring some clarification around some current practice to make sure that we've got a constitution that reflects current practice. So we are now have a provision that will allow for the leader to call additional cabinet meetings as to when he requires those. That is actually something he can do within law, but we're just making sure that the Constitution reflects the legal position. We're also setting out the quorum provisions, so there's no doubt as to the quorum provision, and that's really to assist the reader of the Constitution to know that there is a minimum figure of members that need to be in attendance. We've also included public question time to be part of the business. Whilst it is a part of the Cabinet's a business, it's not actually specifically set out in their procedurals. And we've also included a provision that the content of the agenda will be determined by the leader and the chief executive, which is actually our current working practice. Also, we are clarifying that a member who is invited to attend Cabinet for a particular agenda item confirms that they are able to attend that meeting but not able to vote on the matter. So it's just documenting what our current practices are. Councillor Van Dalken, you all know that you've had invitations before to come to Cabinet in your capacity with audit and scrutiny to talk to Cabinet on a paper. You've come along and presented your paper. And then you've then not taken part in votes. So it's just really capturing what our practice are. So it's clear to those reading the Constitution who wants to understand how we run those meetings, how other members can be involved. We also include a provision that statutory officers can add items on the agenda. There are certain circumstances where the monitoring officer or the Section 151 officer may have to put items on the agenda in exercise of their statutory functions. Now, sorry, members, the member question time element has been removed from the Cabinet procedural. So if I can remind members, with public question time, under last time this was examined, we had a provision for public to register for public question time. And then there was a provision enabled for members to register to speak during public question time. That has actually been removed from the council procedurals and included into the cabinet procedurals, just to provide some clarification. The reason for that is at public question time at full council, members can ask questions of the cabinet under that specific item. So we're just removing the duplication on that. And finally, we're including the ability for the leader to take urgent decisions relating to executive functions and key decisions. It is a matter of law that he can do that, but we're just making sure that it's clear from the Constitution to the reader that they are the powers of the leader, and then there is a reporting requirement on those decisions taken, as with all executive decisions. So that is the quick canter through the cabinet procedurals. Do any members have any questions on this part of the presentation, please?
Members? No? Now I think we're all right, Emma.
Lovely, thank you. So I'm now going to move on to the access to information procedurals. So as you can see from the presentation, we've had two parts that we have removed, and we've got some new provisions or clarifying provisions coming forward. So again, the main principle has been to standardise and to reorder the access to information rule was in line of the whole constitution review. And we are now in sort of clarifying some positions. So the first point of recording of a meeting. Now, some time ago, there was a piece of legislation introduced which enabled members of the public to come along and to record public meetings. We did have a provision within the Constitution that did refer to this, but these latest provisions actually update that further. It actually sets out in a bit more detail, but essentially a member of the public can come along to any meeting of the authority and record that meeting as long as they are not disruptive. They have a legal right to do that. So the Constitution is just setting out that right in a slightly more clearer format. So members of the public who are looking at the Constitution to see, can I come along and do that? They can see, yes, they can, and under what circumstances they could be asked to not do it. We've also looked at the information which is described as either exempt or confidential. Under the Local Government Act, there is definitions as to what is exempt and what is confidential information. Exempt information is information that is set out in Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, and that's where we have to be certified that a provision is engaged. Confidential information is information that's been given us under a duty of competence. So we've looked to provide clarification on that that table. It is complicated, and because quite often officers will use exempt and confidential to mean the same thing, but under local government law, there is two very distinct schedules of information, and the Constitution is set out to make that clearer. We've then looked at the provisions for the decision planner. As members know, we publish a decision planner which sets out all the decisions the authority is likely to take. Now, legally, it should only just be the executive, but we've actually extended it to include other meetings, full council, and other meetings where significant decisions are to be taken. So we've had features of the local plan, licensing committee on there as well. At the moment, we do a 4-month period, and it's published every month, and it's a bit of a rolling document. But what we're suggesting is that the period should be reduced down to 3 months. That makes sure that the document is more meaningful, and that decisions are taken with a bit more assurances when we start to publish it. So it's one of our key documents that tells the public when and how we are going to take decisions. Now, just to give you a reminder, the date of decisions in a decision planner, it doesn't have to be the actual date. That's when we anticipate. So sometimes those dates do move, having regard to the business, because quite often we may have a plan to take it to one meeting, but because we've had to do other work, we've missed the publishing
in the morning.
Chloe, I'm sorry, your microphone's open.
Sorry, Emma. Apologies.
Apologies about that, members. So just to recap, members, the decision planner has dates in it, but they're not fixed dates. That's when there are anticipated dates, but sometimes due to the needs of the organisation, we have to move those on, and the decision planner is updated to reflect that. So a member of the public can monitor as and when we can take those decisions. But as I say, we're looking to reduce that from 4 months down to 3 months, but it would still be published on a monthly basis. So there's no detriment to the public in reducing that timescale down.
So, Emma, excuse me, just one question. Is the decision planner on the website then?
Yes, it is. It is a public document. Yeah, we are required to publish it. So in addition to the email that we circulate to all members, we also publish it on the decision planner, and we also send it to colleagues in our libraries at present. So an old provision relating to the decision planner, which we are looking to remove. When the decision planner first come forward through legislation, there used to be a requirement for the chief executive to do a statement as to how we've complied with our decision planner. That piece of legislation was repealed, so we've got a hanger on in our constitution to remove that. As there is actually no benefit in the chief exec doing a statement saying how we've complied with the decision planner. What is more important is that we use the decision planner as a tool as it was intended for, which is for giving notice of decisions and then when they're going to be tendered and how the public can access publicly available documents as well. Okay. Before I move on to any other parts, has any other members got any questions about the decision planner? You happy? Lovely, thank you, Chairman.
I think Tom.
Sorry,
Councillor has a question.
It's not on the decision planner. I'm happy to wait if Emma hasn't got to this. It's about the use of social media in the meetings. Shall I ask my question now or later, Emma?
No, you can ask that question because I've already touched upon that, because that's part of the meeting regs where the public can be in attendance. Yes, so Councillor Walsh, please ask your question.
Thank you, and I have looked at the appendix, particularly section 1210, where I notice it very helpfully clarifies that reporters and members of the public can use social media to do postings, etc., so long as they don't disrupt the meeting. Just for the sake of clarity, can I confirm that that also refers to members at a meeting?
I can say that the legislation doesn't exclude members, but the caveat that I'd always give to you as your deputy monitoring officer is, if you are spending time reporting on social media, my question is, where is your mind, on reporting or debating? So there'll always be a question for that member where they think their importance lies. In reporting to the public on a public meeting, which can be seen by the public through a number of channels, or taking part in the discussion and the debate. And would also, it would be potentially a code of conduct complaint as well. Historically, they have happened, but not in this authority, I'm pleased to say, where members have been tweeting, reporting as they can in accordance with those regulations, and then taken part in a vote. And the allegation was that member did not have the information to hand because they'd spent so much time on social media posting. Again, you take into context how many postings, etc., but the law doesn't actually prevent you. But what we would say is exercise extreme caution if you're minded to do that, because as being one of your supporting officers, I would have to pass you a note to say, Councillor X, you appear not to be taking part in the debate, as opposed to just watching you take part in that meeting. So we would recommend that any members who do use social media to be very cautious and exercise judgment when they are doing that.
Thank you, Emma. I think you may slightly have misunderstood the spirit of my question. I was absolutely not thinking at all, and I'm not a regular user of it myself, of any responsible member giving a running commentary. But if, for example, they wanted to post an objective link, or maybe to encourage people to watch it, and make just one posting without disturbing or speaking into their device, I believe from what you said, they would have a right to do so with discretion.
Yes, what we'd ask is, and it can be done, and members have done that. I'm aware of members who've sort of given enhance the publication that we give around our meetings by doing their own postings. But we would always say, and as you recall from our code of conduct training, remember what it looks like when you're looking at a device, even if you're using your device to obtain information to assist with your debate. Just you just have to be cautious. But in terms of the regulations, it doesn't exclude members from doing that. So apologies, Councillor Walsh, if I seem to have taken the wrong line in your question. So, but yes, members can use that provision. So some members. if I may, so I've looked at the decision planner. So if I just look at reports of cabinet member decisions. So as members are aware, if a cabinet member takes a decision under delegated powers, then there has to be a report which records that. But there is a hang on from old legislation that says that a cabinet member should hang on for that decision for 5 days before taking it. So that is no longer a legal requirement. So we're asking for that to be removed from the Constitution because it's not required. And then, but just to remind members that when the cabinet members does exercise their powers to take a decision, there's a report that is published which sets out the decision they've taken, any background documents they've taken into consideration, and any advice, and that is published one on the council's website and also in a cabinet report to cabinet for their decisions to be noted. And also where an officer takes a decision under delegated powers, then there's a requirement for that to be recorded as well, and that for that to be published also. We're also providing clarification around attendance in private sessions. Although this has not been an issue for this authority, there has been concerns about who can attend a private session element of the report. So normally when we move into private session, the public are removed from the meeting, we close down any broadcast, and officers remain. Now, some authorities ask for all officers to leave, so you just leave the clerking officers in the meeting with the lead officer, but we're actually providing some clarification within the Constitution around who may remain in the meeting. But that's just to assist anybody who's been asked to leave a meeting or has any queries about a private session. It's all set in the Constitution, so that's clear. So do members have any questions on that going forward?
No questions, I think, Emma.
Thank you. Okay, so the next part we're going to touch upon is the employment procedure rules. So within the Constitution, we do have employment procedure rules which sets out the processes and for the appointment and dismissal of statutory officers, corporate directors and Tier 3 officers. These are governed by statutory provisions, so there's very little amendments which we can make to these rules. However, what we have done is we've updated the structures to reflect our current practices. We've removed any outdated statutory provisions. Now, one element that we do, we welcome members' views on is a period of which we can suspend an officer. So if I draw your attention to paragraph 5.2 on page 13 of the report, currently where a statutory officer is suspended while an investigation is carried out, this was previously set at 2 months. Now, what we are suggesting, that 2-month period should be extended to 6 months, because the reality is any investigation into an allegation which warrants suspension will take more than 2 months to complete. So, and what we shouldn't be in a process is suspending, then reconfirming that suspension for an indefinite period of time. And most investigations should be carried out within a 6-month period. So we are proposing that there's a 6-month period for that provision. Also, within the points that we're seeking clarification is reference to member relationships. Within certain posts, there's a requirement to declare certain relationships that that applicants have with the authority or members of the authority, and the current definition is very, very broad. So we were looking for members' views on how broad would you want to take that definition in terms of relatives. Some authorities, to my knowledge, has a quite narrow field, so it's like immediate family members, and some go step adoptive. So it's just get an an idea of what members feel would be an appropriate ring fence of relatives for those provisions. So, Chairman, I'm happy to take any
suggestions?
questions or
Members, anyone like to start this off?
You got Councillor Mann, Councillor Van Dalken.
No, thank you, Councillor Mann. You're muted. You're muted.
Thank you very much. On that first point, I would agree. 6 months is much to be preferred as a time period. To suspend an officer, that is quite a serious step to take, and one that's not done lightly, and must be done on a supporting evidence base, and that does take time to put in place. So yeah, I would agree with that. On the question of relationships, that is a very, very difficult one indeed, because notion of family and so on is much more fluid now than even 20, 30 years ago. So I'd be reluctant to give a view on that myself.
Anyone else like to make a comment? Councillor Euston, I think. Yes.
Yeah, I would agree with Councillor Mann on the first point and agree that 6 months is a much more reasonable period for such a serious situation. On the second point, I wonder if it's better to have a requirement for those doing the interviewing, or the other way round, to declare whether they know the candidate or not, and if so, in what capacity, rather than to say family, because family now isn't just husband, wife, children, grandchildren type of thing, uncles and aunts. It can be a much looser arrangement where people aren't married, aren't in a civil partnership or anything of that nature. They just cohabit. But do they then class as family in the same way? And it's open to your interpretation of how that is. And I just wonder if it's better to say, declare a knowledge of the candidate up front, and then to state what that knowledge is. So it may be, for instance, I know this person because they live opposite me, and they may be a really good friend, or they may be a neighbour that you hate and detest, which will inevitably cloud your judgment. So I just wonder if that might be a more simplistic approach. Thank you.
Could I just ask, Emma, what do we actually do at the moment? Maybe
so
very briefly.
Okay, so on page 45, the first paragraph under 18.1, it's that we draw a statement requiring that any candidate for appointment to state in writing whether they are a relative of a councillor or an officer, and then we've got the long list of individuals who would be required to be declared. Even the list that we've got set out on page 45 doesn't include civil or cohabiting arrangements. It sort of just reflects traditional sort of legal relationships as they were, many years ago. So it doesn't still capture potentially all relationships, or relationships where there could be influence, because certainly you could have in one family a cousin twice removed can be as close as somebody who's immediate to you know, it really does depend on the dynamics of your family.
Yeah.
So I think the main thing is that we're looking for a statement that ensures that there is transparency on the recruitment process, that there's no suggestion that people have been employed based upon a relationship that's been undeclared, rather than their abilities. I mean, it doesn't stop them from being appointed, it's just having that particularly where if there's an unsuccessful candidate who's aggrieved by the authority's decision and says, well, the reason that candidate got that job is because there's, you know, their uncle twice removed on a bus queue on a Thursday is also a counsellor. You know, these things are going to be very subjective to an aggrieved party. But if members are happy with that declaration there that's set out on page 45, and not too sure how else to reword it, I will take back the comments from Councillor Eusden around civil partnerships and cohabitees, you know, people who live together as spouses but not in that formal relationship.
I think household is the word, is it? Be a former household with someone. But,
yeah, I can take those comments back.
I think thinking back, when we did discuss this at the DDG meeting, it proved it showed it was impossible to qualify friendships, for instance, or knowing someone. I'm not saying that that's wrong, but to know, you know, you've met somebody once, do you know them, or do you have a beer with them? When we used to be able to have beers with people.
And that's reflective of the advice that we need to give under the code of conduct, when it said, you know, when somebody is your friend, it really much depends on the individual as to how they define somebody as a friend within the household, somebody they have a meaningful relationship, because again, it's all about the context. But I will take back your comments around reflecting on the civil partnership and the cohabiting relation, because equally that, you know, they're not recognised within that list. Have a quick read through, but I'll take those observations back. Thank you, members.
I think Councillor Johnson wished to contribute.
Yes, thank you, Chair. If somebody is suspended for whatever reason, 6 months is a long period. Is there any thoughts about whether there will be any contact regarding what's going on for that person? You know, if you've been accused of something or suspended for a reason, often people just don't know what's going on. There's no sort of provision for information to be fed back. Is that correct?
That would sit outside the Constitution. That would be part of the welfare requirements with our colleagues in HR to look after those colleagues who are find themselves in this situation. At the main part, we're just looking for the duration of the suspension, but I would anticipate that there's all appropriate welfare procedures in place with those who find themselves in these circumstances to be supported and to be provided with information and timely updates. I hope that answers your question, Councillor Johnson.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, Emma, should we move on then?
Okay.
No more questions? No.
Okay, so members, that concludes the Constitution review, and we've got our formal decisions, Chairman, set out on pages 5 and 6 for members to consider. We've captured the notes of members during our discussions, and I'm very grateful for your support. So, Chairman, could I ask you to deal with the recommendation decisions on pages 5 and 6, please?
With pleasure. So we're asked to note the proposed changes to Chapter 2 of the Constitution, and that we agree any comments or suggested amendments raised by members today. Please note that any comments or amendments suggested will be considered by the monitoring officer first, and then incorporated where necessary ahead of full council on the 29th of March 2021. If a member wishes to make any further comments in respect to the report, please indicate via the chat function. But if no members wish to raise any other matters, I'll take silence as agreement that the report has been noted. Members, can you please confirm? Thank you, members. The report has been noted, including suggested amendments and points to be considered. And we'll now proceed to agenda item 6, governance review, part 1. Members, this report is set out on pages 50 to 71 of the agenda. And can I once more invite Emma Wisby to set out the report?
Thank you, Chairman. Members, again, this is a continuation of the governance review that we've been undertaking as part of the overall constitution review. And there's 4 aspects that I'm going to bring for you this afternoon, those being the petitions policy, the new report template, which I referred to in the previous item, sealing authorisations forms, and notice of private business. So the substance of this report is around the petitions policy, which again was considered by DGG at its meeting, and there was quite a lengthy debate on this particular item. So at the moment, the petitions policy sits within the Constitution, and it's our thoughts that this should be a separate policy document that sits outside the Constitution in a document in its own way. So this is what we've been looking to achieve. Now, part of the discussions that we've had is looking at the petition threshold. So each authority sets a threshold which has to be achieved for a petition to be valid and to be considered under the petition schemes. Now, we undertook a piece of research to look at what some of our neighbouring authorities do, and on the slide on your screen you can see the current petition thresholds of the council, which is 20, and then you've got our neighbours. Culture Zoo has a minimum of 1. How you have a petition of 1, we're not too sure. And then we have colleagues at Chelmsford who have a requirement of 50. DGG looked at this and wanted to re-examine the threshold. It was felt that we needed a threshold that was achievable, because depending on the subject matter, you may only have a small group of individuals who are particularly interested to bring something to the authority's attention through the petition scheme. Alternatively, they didn't want a threshold set so high that it could never be achieved. So this is just the starting threshold for a petition to deem to be valid under the scheme. There are further thresholds which would then be triggering who would then consider the petition. So in addition to exploring the threshold, they also wanted to confirm who could sign a petition. And DGG's discussion confirmed that the petition really should be signed by somebody who lived, worked and learnt in the district, and that they were on the electoral register. Now, the reason why DGG sort of looked at the requirement for the electoral register, because it gives us a means to do the validation process of individuals, as petitions can be created through 2 structures, essentially a manual petition or an online. There is always those who will sign with falsehoods in their mind, so give a false name or a false address. We have to be certain that those who do sign are meeting our criteria, and the most logical thought was to have those on the electoral register as a means to check. So it was considered by DGG that 30 should be the threshold limit, and that's an increase of 10 on our existing thresholds. Chairman, at this point, did you want to invite members to talk on this part?
Yes, by all means, members. What do we think about well, I guess there's 2 points, the threshold and who can be part of a petition. Any members like to speak? I can't get my...
You've got Councillor Mann, Councillor Van Dolken.
Councillor Mann, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I think 30 is a fair starting point, shows serious intent. I agree, I can't see how you can have a petition of one. We did, as you recall, at DGG have quite a long sort of conversation about the starting figure and where the actual petition should go according to number. And I think there was common agreement that 30 was a fair figure, and that you've got to, if it's a petition about district council responsibility, then it's entirely fair to check that all of those 30 and others are residents, and the only way you can do that is via the electoral roll. And so I think that too is fair. So in my book, tick for 30 and tick for check on the electoral roll.
Thank you, Councillor Mann, and Councillor Eusden.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to say that I agree entirely with Councillor Mann. I think 30 is a fair number. It demonstrates a depth of feeling, and I think it's absolutely right that if it's a district matter, then you should live in the district and be on the electoral register. Thank you very much.
Are there any further contributions? If not, I will agree with both on both points.
Okay. Thank you, members.
So I think we can move on then, can we?
Thank you. We can. So Chairman and members, so we have a starting threshold for a petition to deem to be valid, and then we've got thresholds which, once triggered, will then decide who will then consider the petition for action. Now, again, we've carried out some research with our neighbouring authorities to see how we can compare with our neighbouring colleagues as to what their triggers are. Now, as you can see, at the current, if we have a petition that has 500 or less signatures, then it will be considered by an officer. Sorry, I do apologise, Chairman, I've got that wrong. Sorry, petitions requiring officers to give evidence must have 500 signatures. A matter to be referred to full council for debate must have 1,000 signatures or more, and then for cabinet it is up to 999. So across the board, we're not we sit quite comfortably with our neighbours. Tendring thresholds are much lower than ours. Basildon's thresholds, 5,000 signatures for a matter to be brought to full council, seems on the heavy side for this sort of authority area. Obviously, their thresholds reflect how their areas are made up and their populations. But as you can see, we are not currently too dissimilar in terms of the need for signatures to be presented. Now, DGG again explored this for quite some time, looking at the thresholds and then what activities would take place. So it was considered that petitions that are between 30 and 999, the Performance Management Committee will consider the petition and shall determine the petition or refer the petition to the Chief Officer or refer a petition to the Cabinet Member for determination. Petitions between 1,000 signatures and 2,000 signatures would be considered by Cabinet, and petitions with 2,000 or more would be considered by full council. And for officers to give evidence, the threshold we set at 1,000. So members, we're just looking at your views on those thresholds to see if you feel that they are appropriate or whether they are too light or too heavy. So I'd welcome your observations, please.
Members, you have your invitation. Councillor Mann.
Well, again, Chair, on the basis of the DG lengthy
Yes.
iteration, you recall it was a long meeting. This again had the support, I think, of all the group leaders as being fair. Indeed, everybody at that particular meeting. You've got to have some sort of gradation as to the the level of support for a particular point of view petition, and yeah, this I think is a sensible way forward, and I personally support it.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. And not that it's directly applicable to this, but I think the point was made, and Councillor Mann will agree or not with me if my memory fails me. But we don't have many petitions, so really it was a bit of a, so it could be a storm in a teacup. But so I certainly agree with those, and I don't have any issue with that. Any Councillor Wallace?
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's a bit high, to be honest, because doubling the threshold for council from 1,000 to 2,000, I think that's quite high. Emma, could I just ask, in your experience as an officer, how many petitions off the top of your head have actually been brought to full council in the past, please?
Oh, I think in the last year we've had at least 2. We have a period of time where we had the local plan and we had a number of petitions brought forward. They're not widely used, but there is an increase in the popularity again of petitions. It's something that we have seen across the local government family, not necessarily for this authority, but we do receive a number of petitions over in a year, some which don't come to members because if they're linked to a planning matter, then they go before the planning committee, and that, to be honest, is the greatest use around petitions. But in terms of ordinary petitions, sort of looking for members to take a particular course of action, maybe 1-2 a year, but they are increasing in popularity because there are a number of digital platforms now for petitions. There's a number of websites where people can go on and create a petition and allow it run for a period of time, and then it's submitted to a local authority. So this is an area that it has its peaks and troughs. But what we have sort of reflected upon is the current use of petitions and use that as an opportunity to see how well our scheme works and how well it operates, because this scheme has been in place for a number of years. There was a time where the authority had to have a statutory petition process. That legislation was abolished. Some authorities decided that they would not accept petitions altogether. We, as an authority, feel it's appropriate to keep petitions because it's a democratic tool. But as you can see, in terms of the numbers, we are not unusual in our numbers, and I don't think it would be unusual if members adopted the thresholds that's been suggested.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. Are there any further comments on this? No? I think we can move on then. Emma, you have the comment from Councillor Wallace. And
we do. Thank you. Okay, so another change to the petitions policy, which is quite a big departure, is currently a petition that has been submitted in the last 12 months. If we have enough petitions on the same or substantively the same issue, then it's excluded from the petition scheme. Now, it was considered that it would be appropriate to bring that time period in line with the decision-making provisions for the authority. So at the moment, if the council takes a decision, it can't take the same decision again within 6 months, but it can do after that 6 month period. So it's considered that the same threshold should apply. So it is proposed that the petition time limit should be reduced to 6 months. So it would be possible within 1 year that a petition could be presented, twice, because once 6 months has passed, it can be brought again. So it's suggested that that's reduced from 12 months down to 6 months. Now, the other point that we are introducing is a right of appeal on the handling of the petition, not the decision or the outcome of the petition, but a handling. So it's proposed that an appeal process will be introduced, which would be to the chairman of the Performance Management Scrutiny Committee, who would look at the handling against the council's policy for dealing with petitions. Because they're only looking at the compliance with process element, not the decision, it would be a paper-based appeal. So we feel it would be appropriate that it's just dealt with by the chairman of the Performance Management Board. That way we don't have to convene a meeting of the meeting, and that the chairman of that committee, who members know has special powers as the Statutory Scrutiny Committee, would exercise that appeal process. So that is the recommendation, that there is an appeal process. So if anybody's unhappy with the way that we dealt with a petition, they could appeal to the chairman of the PMB, have that examined, and then have a response. But what it wouldn't do is overturn the decision that was taken in response to the petition itself. I'm happy to take members' questions on that.
I think Councillor Walsh.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Just a point on clarity. I see reference was made to consideration, Emma, of online petitions. Can you expand on that? Is that something that the council does plan to introduce?
It's something that we're examining. At the moment, there is a number of websites that are hosts for online petitions, and when we have petitions submitted to us, the information that we can look at is very, very limited, and it really depends on the parameters that have been set by the petition user. So to engage with those who are interested in using the petitions in an online format, we are going to look at our current software that we have available to see if we can look at providing an online petition facility. That way we will set out the information that we require in order to carry out the validation processes, because at the moment, when petitions are sent to us from an online platform, we only get a PDF version, and that PDF version is subject to editing controls, so we can't even do redactions to protect people's identities or addresses. So we're looking within our current resources to see if we can provide a venue to host that function, and then that will work in the way that we need it for the petition to run in an unfettered way, so it can be accessed and publicised as we would on any other platform, but also that we can carry out our vetting processes, and also for the lead petitioner, who we would deem to be the data controller, is responsible for insurance compliance with data protection, also that the signatories understand what will happen to their information when it's passed to the local authority as part of the petition scheme. So we're looking at sort of giving some opportunity, but also creating some expectation from the authority with the petitioners as to what they are responsible for in just giving us a petition going forward. But we are certainly examining that, and once we got the petition scheme sorted out, then that's the next thing we'll start to explore. But currently our software that we use for publishing our agendas does have a facility for petitions, and some of the software we've used historically for the broadcast of our committees has a petition element to it. So we're looking to resources we've currently got before we start looking to invest in any other tools.
I have Thank you, Emma. I have Councillor Mann as wishing to speak, but before I do, my sense from the DDG meeting was that we would definitely wish to have our own in-house e-petition, and so as to avoid the the problems, let's put it that way, that there were with the last large one to do with the local plan, wasn't it?
No.
I'm trying to remember what it was.
I'm trying to remember which one it was.
Garden communities.
It was, thank you,
Yes,
Councillor
okay.
Mann. Yes, so yes.
Half right, yeah.
But at the moment, we're just examining where we can look at that within our current software, because obviously if we can utilise what we've already got within systems before looking to purchase something, then...
But I just wanted to point out that I think the feeling was quite strong that that this was a good idea, and that it should be pursued,
Yep.
you know, as with all haste.
Okay.
Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Chairman. Great minds and all that, but Councillor Walsh has already asked my question about sort of validation of online, and thank you for your answer, Emma. As to the 6 months rule now, I think that is sensible in that it is consistent with other working practice. So I would support that too. And I do recollect, as with you, Chairman, that the feeling of the DGD was that we purpose build something so that the problems of validation can be built into it to make the exercise of checking the participants easier, because it does seem really silly to have, you know, petitions that get thrown out because the people taking part are not residents. So anything we can do to sort of make the data secure about residency, I think is to be welcomed.
Thank you. And I will also think the reducing the time period from 12 to 6 months makes sense. And as for the performance management board, yes, that was the feeling of the DDG. So I'll go with that. Are there any other points that members would like to make on this? No?
Okay. Members, I've stopped sharing the presentation, so screen back because we've concluded that part. So, but to continue with the part of the governance review. So the next aspect is the new report template, which is set out on pages 63 and 68 on your report, which is the report template and the confidential appendix. Now we're looking to introduce a new report. Now we're kind of bring this to your attention so you can see it as part of the overall and comprehensive governance and constitutional review. We wouldn't normally seek member approval to essentially format a report, but we felt it was useful for members to see this. The report template that we currently use, we've had various observations over the years as to it's not very easy to complete. There's repetition. Some have described it being clunky, and then there's some practice with some colleagues who put their report in the executive summary rather than just doing a light touch introduction to the report. So we have reviewed it and how we look at news and reports, and how we're looking to news reports to record cabinet member and officer decisions. And rather than having series of templates to record all the decisions, we are looking to have one report template. And the purpose of the template would come into right at the very beginning of a concept to come before members. So it'll be a living live document. So what it's proposed is that when officers have got a concept to bring to members for decision, they will use this report template to take it through all our internal governance arrangements, all the approval process through management board, corporate governance, corporate management team, and JET and the like before it gets on the agenda. It sets out some very clear headings which need to be completed by each of the report authors, and they're designed to make sure that advice is taken by the report author on their concepts at the right time. Quite often, unfortunately, it's not unusual for a report to come before my team for publishing, and we realise it's not actually been through the other department's hands where they need to have some consideration. So the report template that we're proposing seeks to encourage that it's a live document, that the report authors, when they start to build it, talk to the right departments to get the advice, and members, when they have the report presented to them, have confidence that it's been through the legal colleagues' hands, it's been through the accountant's hands, it's been through some of our other technical advisors' hands, and that there is a sign-off. Now, the report template, as you can see on, if I just take you there, on page 66, has got 2 boxes, and those boxes are for the internal sign-off process. So we know that when the report is going through the various stages, it's got approval to go forward to members for consideration. Now, those boxes will appear and disappear in the life of the report. So if this is a report that's been prepared for full council, we would see in the draft reports that those reports have all been signed off, and then when we go to publishing, they would be admitted for publishing, but we would have a record that it's all gone through all our appropriate checks and balances. This is the same report template that we'd use for a member delegation report. So where a member or a cabinet member is exercising a delegated authority, either directly from the leader scheme of delegation or from a committee or full council, that they will use the same report for recording their decisions. So we're not looking around for various templates. Now, as you know, members, from your experience with council bundles of paper, if we have a cabinet, if I use cabinet as is probably the easiest one, if we've got a private report going to cabinet, we have a public cabinet report, and then we have a private cabinet report. We are looking to move away from that by having all the confidential information set out in appendix. This will give confidence to members and officers that if they are looking at confidential information, it is located in one provision. So there's not a possibility that a confidential report is picked up inadvertently in a public session, and it will help members to identify. So as you recall, at the moment, confidential report information in a report is bold, italic within the report, and that is quite hard for people to pick out. I do have colleagues who use that as formatting tools, and my team have to go to them and say, actually, do you mean this is confidential information because that's how we format confidential information, or are you just formatting your reports? So these 2 documents are looking to streamline how we produce our documents, and also to improve the quality of the information in the reports to members by having that sign-off process met at all the appropriate hurdles. So members, I would just welcome any of your observations on that report template and the confidential appendix template, please.
Members, any comments? I seem to recall that there was quite a lot of enthusiasm for that, certainly from me. And I couldn't really see any reason to object to it. Any other comments? No? Well, Emma, you got a perfect score there.
Lovely, thank you very much. So members, the next item that we're bringing for your information is the sealing request form. Now, this is a document that's part of the, it's actually been in existence for a while, but it's showing you how we use the internal documents for checks and balances to make sure that we've got proper authorities to enter into contracts, agreements, etc. So this is a document that we've actually been using for some time now, and it's actually one of the key documents that I work with on a regular basis. One, either giving advice as to the authority for sealing, but also as the sealing officer for the authority. So the concept around this report is to focus the mind of officers that when they've got a contract that needs to be signed or an agreement to be signed, they make sure that the document is properly set out and that they've got a proper authority to enter into the agreement. And then I, as the authorised signatory, review this, check that against the minutes or the authority that's been cited that we can enter into the agreement, and then we sign it off. So it's one of our key governance internal documents. Plus, if we ever have a query as to who did what and why with the document, we've got this document to recall, because we do retain these as well, so we can see who's got an instruction. So it's here for your information, members, but I'd welcome any observations that you have.
I was just going to say, Emma, could you again very briefly just remind us what sealing involves? Not everyone is necessarily aware of that.
Okay, so when we seal a document, it's effectively signing a document on behalf of the organisation. So this is where we apply a seal to a document, which is it is the signature of the authority. So we have documents which we have under seal because it deems us greater protection. So deeds are sealed. We have other documents which we are obliged to seal by legislation. But it's basically gives us 12 years of protection on the agreement. Some other documents I sign with my name as an authorised signatory to some of the groups, and that will depend upon the value of the contracts and the protection that we require in those documents. But it's essentially applying a very large piece of material, and I'm actually just looking around see if I can see something that I've sealed recently. But it's essentially, you know, if this building could sign its name, it's the building signing its name. But it is, you know, if the authorities entered into a contract, it must be sealed. So if there's any misuse of the seal, then this is the one, the records that we would go to check if there's any misuse. So it's a checks and balance document. And
it does mean, I think, that the comeback can be for a longer period of time. Is that right? 6 years?
It does, yes. It's the limitation periods that are available to us for legal action should there be a breach of contract. So if it's contracts under seal, then it's 12 years.
Before we go on, I must apologise. My battery, I say my battery, my computer battery is about to give up.
Okay.
So I'm going to have to switch very quickly. Could I ask Councillor Johnson just to take over for me for a second while I switch out and come back on another item? Thank you very much.
Well, Chairman, I am at the very end of our part, so hopefully I won't detain you for too longer. So,
right. Well, if I do disappear, then Councillor Johnson will finish the meeting for me. All
thank
right.
you. Thank you very much. So, the last two documents we're just bringing to members' attention is a notice of private business. Now, these are set out pages 70 and 71. There's one for full council and there is one for cabinet. In essence, we have a legal obligation to provide a notice of intention to conduct business in private. So that's when we want to hold a private session. And for cabinet, there's a legal obligation for that, as we need to give 28 days notice of our intention to hold a meeting in private session, and there is a ability for the member public who may be aggrieved by that to make a representation to the monitoring officer. We also reflect those arrangements for full council. There's not a legal obligation in the same way, but we feel for transparency reasons, we felt that it's appropriate to give notice to members of the public or anybody who's interested in a particular business item that we are going to hold an item, or it's our intention to hold a part of the meeting in private session. So these two notices are used we publish them on the council's website with the agenda the cabinet one, it forms part of our decision planner document. So if we're going to go into private session for cabinet, we attach one of these notices to the decision planner. And then the full council one we published on the agenda website, because we don't have to give 28 days notice of that. But we do make sure that there's a copy of the notice available to the public. So it's just to make people aware and to raise any concerns, because the public may consider there's a greater public interest in dealing with a matter which officers consider should be dealt with in private session, should be dealt with in public session. To my knowledge, we have not had anybody make representations under these notices, but it is there for the public to be aware of, and it's just one of our key documents for the governance arrangements for Cabinet and full council. So do members have any questions on either of these notices, please?
Members? Councillor Mann.
Going back, Chair, to the request for sealing, I mean, that's very specialist document, specialist area, and it's Emma's specialist area. So if she says it's okay, it's okay, and has my support. And anything that concentrates the minds of officers, be welcome. And as for the two other issues on page 70 and 71, I think they're fine in order. We do as a council take as much as we possibly can in public, which I think is a good thing. But there does occasions do occur when we aren't able to do that for the sort of stated reasons. So support both of those two, Chair, before you expire.
No, I've come back fighting. Yeah, my apologies for that. Thank you very much, Councillor Mann. Yes, obviously when there are sensitive commercial issues in particular, that it makes sense to do it in public. Are there any other comments or questions by? No? Are we finished then, Emma, for that part?
We are, I'm pleased to say, Chairman. Thank you very much for your indulgence.
No, I didn't. No implication.
No, it's been 2 hours of governance and constitution, so I'm grateful. So, Chairman, it's just now for you to deal with the recommended decisions, please, on page 51 of the report. So it's asked that we note the report and agree any comments or suggested amendments raised by members this afternoon. Please note that any comments or amendments suggested will be considered by the monitoring officer first and then incorporated where necessary ahead of full council on the 29th of March 2021. If no members wish to raise any further matters, I'll take silence as agreement that the report has been noted. Can you please confirm, members? Thank you very much. The report has been noted and any suggested amendments approved. Members, this item concludes our business for this afternoon. I'll therefore close the meeting of the Corporate Governance Group at 2:30. Thank you for your attendance this afternoon, and to those watching the broadcast via the Council's YouTube channel. I'll now hand back to the meeting facilitator.
Thank you, Councillor.
Sorry, Chloe.
Sorry, Jess.
Sorry,
Thank you, Chairman. Before I ask the webcast to terminate the broadcast, I would like to remind you that the Council will retain performance data relating to your connection to the meeting in the event of a legal challenge to this new way of holding meetings. Can the webcaster please confirm that the broadcast has ceased?